Man leaves his sick daughter in an abandoned forest, but what the horse does is inspiring. The blanket was all Michael had left to give his daughter. He tucked it around 7-year-old Emma's trembling body, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the simple task. The autumn leaves scattered across the forest floor were damp from yesterday's rain, and the smell of eucalyptus hung heavy in the air. This abandoned stretch of bushland outside Ballarat had once been logged decades ago, and now nature was slowly reclaiming it, creating a maze of regrowth forest that few people ever entered. Emma's fever had spiked again during the night. Her small face was flushed, her breathing shallow and rapid. The infection in her lungs had spread despite the antibiotics he'd managed to scrape together money for 2 weeks ago. Now those were gone, the money was gone, and Michael had run out of options. "Dad, I'm cold." Her voice was barely a whisper, weak and fragile as dried leaves. Michael felt something break inside his chest, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. He pulled off his own jacket and laid it over her blanket, even though he knew it wouldn't be enough. Nothing would be enough. Not anymore. "I know, sweetheart. Just rest now." Michael Davies had been a good father once. A mechanic in Bendigo with steady work, a small house, a wife who smiled when she looked at him. Then Sarah got sick. Breast cancer. The treatments drained their savings faster than he could earn it back. She fought for 2 years before the disease took her, leaving Michael with a 6-year-old daughter and debts that buried him alive. He'd tried everything, worked 3 jobs, sold the house, moved into his ute, parking behind shopping centers and pretending Emma thought it was an adventure. But the stress, the poor nutrition, the constant moving, it had weakened Emma's immune system. A simple cold had turned into bronchitis, then pneumonia. The hospital bills piled up. Social services started asking questions he couldn't answer. He was 3 days away from losing custody of his daughter when he'd made his decision. If he couldn't save her, at least he could spare her from dying in a foster home, separated from the only parent she had left. The thought made him physically ill, but Michael had convinced himself this was mercy. Out here in the bush, she would fall asleep and not wake up. It would be peaceful, quick, better than the slow suffocation of her worsening pneumonia, better than watching her waste away in some sterile hospital room while strangers made decisions about her care. He told himself these lies because the truth was too horrible to face, that he was giving up, that he was abandoning his child because he didn't know what else to do. Emma coughed, a wet rattling sound that tore at Michael's heart. Her eyes fluttered open, those same hazel eyes Sarah had passed down to her. "Where are we, Daddy?" "Just a quiet place to rest, Em. Somewhere peaceful." She seemed to accept this, too weak to question, too trusting to doubt. That trust was the worst part. Even now, abandoned in a forest, dying slowly, she believed her father was doing the right thing. Michael knelt beside her, memorizing every detail of her face, the freckles across her nose, the way her light brown hair curled at the ends, the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off her bike learning to ride without training wheels. All the tiny details that made her his Emma, his whole world, the only good thing left in his broken life. "I love you so much. You know that, don't you? I love you too, Daddy." Her voice was getting quieter. Michael felt tears streaming down his face, hot and unstoppable. He kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of her sweat mixed with his tears. "Close your eyes now, sweetheart. Have a rest." Emma's eyes drifted shut. Her breathing evened out slightly as exhaustion pulled her toward sleep. Michael stayed kneeling beside her for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sun filtered through the canopy of stringy bark and mountain ash, creating patterns of light and shadow across the forest floor. A kookaburra laughed somewhere in the distance, the sound jarring and inappropriate. Finally, Michael stood. His legs were stiff, his whole body felt like lead. He took 3 steps away from Emma, then stopped, turned back, looked at her small form wrapped in that worn blanket, so vulnerable and alone. He couldn't do this, but he had to. Michael took another step away, then another. Each one felt like walking through concrete. His vision blurred with tears, his chest so tight he thought his heart might actually stop. That would be better. If he could just die here too, fall down beside Emma and let the bush claim them both. But his legs kept moving, carrying him away from his daughter even as every instinct screamed at him to turn back. He'd parked his ute nearly 2 kilometers away on an old logging road, far enough that Emma wouldn't hear the engine, wouldn't know he was leaving. He'd planned it all out with the cold calculation of someone who'd stopped thinking clearly weeks ago. The walk back was the longest of his life. Michael stumbled through the undergrowth, branches catching at his clothes, his boots slipping on the damp leaves. Twice he turned around, ready to go back, ready to gather Emma up and face whatever consequences came. But fear stopped him. Fear of social services taking her, fear of watching her die slowly in his arms with no way to help, fear of being the father who couldn't save his own child, so he kept walking. When he finally reached the ute, Michael collapsed against it, sobbing so hard he thought he might vomit. He'd just murdered his daughter. That's what this was. No matter how he tried to frame it in his mind as mercy or release. He'd left a 6-7-year-old alone in the bush to die. Michael climbed into the ute, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life. He sat there, foot on the brake, unable to make himself put it in gear. Through the windscreen, he could see the track leading deeper into the forest, back toward where Emma lay sleeping. Go back. The thought was a scream in his head. Go back right now. But Michael put the ute in drive and pulled away, the tires crunching on the gravel road. He made it about 50 meters before he had to stop, leaning out the door to be sick on the side of the track. When there was nothing left, he wiped his mouth and kept driving, leaving his daughter behind in the abandoned forest. What Michael couldn't see from where he'd left Emma, was the white horse that emerged from deeper in the bush, a Brumby, wild and wary, with a coat that gleamed pale in the filtered sunlight. The horse had been watching from the moment Michael arrived, staying hidden in the thick scrub, as humans always meant trouble for wild horses. Now, with the man gone and his mechanical beast rumbling away into the distance, the Brumby moved closer. She was a mare, perhaps 10 years old, scarred from life in the wild but strong and alert. She'd been born free in these ranges, had never felt a rope or saddle, had learned to survive through instinct and wariness. But something about the small human lying so still on the forest floor pulled at her. The mare approached slowly, nostrils flaring, testing the air for danger. The child smelled of sickness and fear, and something else the horse couldn't name but recognized, the scent of a creature in distress. Emma stirred as the mare drew near, her eyes opening to slits. Through her fever haze, she saw something white and beautiful standing over her. An angel, she thought dimly. Mum had told her about angels before she died, said they'd watch over her. Maybe this was one. The mare lowered her head, her breath warm against Emma's face. The child didn't move, too weak to be frightened. The horse nuzzled her gently, that ancient instinct of herd animals to care for the vulnerable, overwhelming her usual caution around humans. Emma's hand moved slightly, fingers brushing the mare's soft muzzle. The contact seemed to satisfy something in both of them. The mare settled down beside the child, her large body creating a windbreak, her presence a comfort against the growing cold of the autumn afternoon. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening between the trees. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of the warm horse beside her, sometimes lost in fever dreams where her mother was calling her name and her father was telling her everything would be all right. The mare stayed vigilant. When a dingo appeared at the edge of the clearing, drawn by the scent of weakness, the Brumby stood and stamped her hooves, ears pinned back in warning. The dingo considered its chances against a fully grown horse and slunk back into the scrub. The mare settled back down beside Emma, positioning her body between the child and any potential threats. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Emma's shivering grew worse despite the blankets wrapped around her. The mare moved closer, pressing her body against the child, sharing her warmth. It was an extraordinary thing, this wild horse caring for a human child, something that defied the mare's every instinct for self-preservation. But animals know things humans sometimes forget. They understand suffering, they recognize innocence, and sometimes, inexplicably, they choose compassion over survival. Emma woke in the deep night, her fever breaking temporarily, leaving her lucid but desperately thirsty. She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The horse was right there, a pale shape in the darkness, her eyes reflecting the moonlight filtering through the canopy. "You're real. You're not an angel." The mare nickered softly, almost as if in answer. Emma's throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. She thought about the creek her dad used to take her to, wondered if there was water somewhere nearby. As if reading her thoughts, the mare stood and moved away a few steps, then looked back at Emma and whinnied. Emma couldn't follow. She was too weak, too sick. The mare seemed to understand this. She returned to the child's side and laid down fully this time, her legs folded beneath her, making herself as low to the ground as possible. It took Emma a moment to understand what the horse was offering. With tremendous effort, Emma pulled herself partially onto the mare's back, draping herself across the warm body. The mare stood carefully, slowly, keeping her movements gentle. The child clung to her mane, barely conscious but holding on with the last of her strength. The mare walked through the forest with extraordinary care, her steps measured and cautious. She knew these woods intimately, knew where the ground was treacherous and where it was safe. She made her way toward the sound of running water, a small creek that wound through this part of the bush. At the creek's edge, the mare knelt down again, allowing Emma to slide from her back. The child crawled the last meter to the water and drank deeply, the cold liquid soothing her burning throat. She drank until her stomach hurt, then collapsed on the bank, exhausted by even this small exertion. The mare drank too, then settled beside Emma once more. The child's fever was rising again, her brief moment of clarity fading. She curled against the horse's warm flank, and the mare curved her neck around protectively, creating a living shelter against the cold night air. Meanwhile, 30 kilometers away in a dingy motel room outside Ballarat, Michael sat on the edge of a stained mattress with his head in his hands. He hadn't been able to drive far. Every kilometer away from Emma felt like dragging his own heart behind the ute. He'd pulled in here because he literally couldn't see the road anymore through his tears. The television in the corner was on, but he wasn't watching it. He was seeing Emma's face, hearing her voice saying she loved him, feeling the weight of what he'd done crushing down on him like a physical force. He'd killed his daughter, not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly and alone in a cold forest. What had he been thinking? That it was somehow better this way? That abandoning a sick child in the bush was an act of love rather than the ultimate betrayal? Michael looked at the phone on the bedside table. He should call someone. The police, an ambulance, give them the location and pray they could find her in time. But if they found Emma alive, they'd arrest him. He'd go to prison for child abandonment, attempted murder perhaps. Emma would go into care, and he'd never see her again. If they found her dead, he'd be charged with murder. Either way, his life was over. But that didn't matter. What mattered was Emma, alone and suffering because of his cowardice. Michael reached for the phone. His hand was shaking so badly he knocked it off the bedside table. It clattered to the floor, and Michael followed it, sliding down to kneel on the stained carpet. He pulled the phone to his ear and dialed 000. Emergency services. Which service do you require? Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat had closed up completely, choked with guilt and fear and the terrible certainty that it was already too late. "Hello, can you hear me? Which service do you need?" "Ambulance. Police. I left my daughter in the forest. She's sick. She's dying. I left her there." The words tumbled out in a rush. And once started, Michael couldn't stop. He told them everything, where she was, what he'd done, how sick she was. The operator's voice remained calm and professional, asking him to stay on the line, saying help was being dispatched. Michael gave them his location, agreed to wait there for the police. When he finally hung up, he felt hollowed out, empty except for a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd reach Emma in time. Back in the forest, Emma's fever raged higher. She was no longer conscious, her small body burning up despite the cold night air. The mare stood over her, as she had for hours now, a white guardian in the darkness. When the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the horse lifted her head and nickered softly. She heard something the child couldn't, the distant sound of vehicles, of human voices calling out, of organized movement through the bush. The search had begun. The mare's instincts screamed at her to run. Humans meant capture, meant ropes and confinement and loss of freedom. But looking down at the small, feverish child who had trusted her through the long night, the mare found herself rooted to the spot. She couldn't leave. Not yet. The sounds grew closer. The mare's ears swiveled, tracking multiple sources of noise converging on their location. She stamped nervously, but didn't bolt. Instead, she moved to position herself directly over Emma, her body a clear signal to any approaching threat that they'd have to go through her first. Senior Constable Jenny Walsh was the first to spot them. She'd been with Victoria Police for 15 years, had seen plenty of terrible things, but the sight of that white horse standing guard over a small child made her stop in her tracks. "I've got her! She's here!" Jenny's shout brought the rest of the search team crashing through the undergrowth. 2 paramedics, another constable, and a local volunteer who knew these woods. They all stopped short when they saw the Brumby, this wild horse that should have fled at their approach, but instead stood her ground, ears pinned back, protecting the child beneath her. "Easy, girl. We're here to help." Jenny approached slowly, hands out, making herself as non-threatening as possible. The mare's nostrils flared, her body tense, ready to fight or flee, but she didn't move away from Emma. One of the paramedics, a bloke named Dave who'd grown up on a cattle station, moved forward carefully. He'd worked with horses his entire life, understood their language. He spoke in low, soothing tones, the kind of steady voice that calmed frightened animals. "You've done good, girl. You've kept her safe. Let us help now." The mare's ears flickered forward slightly. Listening, Dave took another step, then another. The horse shifted but didn't charge, didn't run. She was exhausted too, having stood guard all night, and some part of her understood that these humans were here to help the child she'd been protecting. Finally, with visible reluctance, the mare stepped aside. She moved only a few meters away, staying close, watching as the paramedics rushed to Emma's side. Jesus, she's burning up, temperatures through the roof. Dave's partner, Sarah, was already pulling out their equipment. They worked quickly, professionally, checking Emma's vitals, getting an IV line started, preparing to transport her. Jenny radioed for the helicopter that was standing by, giving their exact coordinates. The whole time, the white mare watched. She didn't approach, but she didn't leave either. She stood at the edge of the clearing, this wild creature who'd abandoned her own survival instincts to care for a dying child. The horse stayed with her all night, kept her warm, probably saved her life. Dave spoke quietly to Jenny, while Sarah worked on Emma. He'd found tracks, could read the story in the disturbed leaves and mud. The horse had moved the child to water, had laid beside her for hours, had stood guard against predators. "I've never seen anything like it. Brumbies don't do this. They avoid humans at all costs." 20 minutes later, the helicopter landed in a nearby clearing. The noise sent the mare skittering back into the tree line, but she didn't disappear completely. As they carried Emma on a stretcher toward the helicopter, Jenny saw flashes of white between the trees, keeping pace with them. Emma was loaded into the helicopter, Sarah climbing in beside her to monitor her condition during the flight to Ballarat Base Hospital. As the helicopter lifted off, Jenny looked down and saw the white horse standing in the clearing, watching them go, a solitary figure in the green expanse of the forest. At the hospital, Michael was brought in under police custody. He'd cooperated fully, told them everything, hadn't tried to run or make excuses. Now he sat in an interview room, his hands cuffed in front of him, waiting to hear if his daughter had been found alive or dead. When Jenny walked in, her face gave nothing away. She sat down across from him, and Michael felt his heart stop. We found Emma. Those 3 words. Everything hinged on what came next. She's alive, critical condition, but the doctors think she'll make it. Michael's head dropped to the table and he sobbed. Relief, shame, gratitude, self-loathing. Every emotion hit him at once. Jenny waited patiently, this broken man who'd done something unforgivable, but had at least called it in, had at least given them a chance to save his daughter. There's something you need to know. Your daughter wasn't alone out there. Michael looked up, confused. Jenny pulled out her phone and showed him photos from the scene. Emma with the white horse standing over her, the tracks showing where the horse had moved her to water, the evidence of the hours-long vigil. A wild brumbie stayed with her all night, kept her warm, protected her, probably saved her life. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Michael stared at the photos, unable to process what he was seeing. He'd left Emma to die alone, but she hadn't been alone. Something miraculous had happened in that forest, something that defied explanation or logic. Can I see her? Please. I know I don't deserve it, but please. Jenny's expression was hard, but not entirely unsympathetic. She'd seen the worst of humanity in her job, but she'd also seen people at their breaking point, making terrible decisions out of desperation rather than malice. That's up to Child Protection Services now, and it'll depend on what the doctors say about Emma's condition. But Michael, you need to understand something. You're going to be charged. What you did was attempted murder in the eyes of the law. I know. I deserve whatever happens. I just need to know she'll be okay, that someone will look after her properly. She'll be looked after. That much I can promise you. Michael nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. He'd destroyed his own life, but maybe, just maybe, Emma would survive this, would be placed with a family who could give her what he couldn't: stability, proper care, a future. 2 days passed. Emma remained in intensive care, her body fighting the pneumonia with the help of powerful antibiotics and round-the-clock medical attention. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for her dad, sometimes murmuring about a white horse that had stayed with her. The nurses thought it was fever dreams until Jenny came to visit and confirmed it was real. She'd brought photos, and when Emma was lucid enough to look at them, the child's face lit up with recognition. She didn't leave me. The white horse stayed. She did, sweetheart. She looked after you all night. You're a very lucky girl. Emma's smile faded as reality crashed back in. Her dad had left her. He'd driven away and abandoned her to die. The horse had stayed, but her father hadn't. That knowledge hurt worse than her struggling lungs, worse than the IV in her arm, worse than anything. On the 3rd day, Emma's fever finally broke for good. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. She'd need weeks of recovery, but she would survive. Child Protection Services had already found a temporary foster placement. A kind woman named Patricia who specialized in emergency care for traumatized children. Michael remained in custody, formally charged with child abandonment and reckless endangerment. His lawyer was talking about psychological evaluations, about grief and depression as mitigating factors, but Michael didn't care about any of that. He'd asked only one thing, to know if Emma was recovering. When Jenny told him Emma would make a full recovery, Michael wept with a gratitude so profound it hurt. He didn't ask to see her. He knew he'd forfeited that right the moment he drove away from that forest clearing. A week after Emma's rescue, something unexpected happened. A local woman named Claire Hutchins came forward after seeing the story on the news. She was a wildlife photographer who'd been documenting the Brumby population in those ranges for years. She had photos of the white mare, taken over several months, showing a horse who seemed different from the others. This mare's special. I've watched her help injured horses in her mob, seen her adopt an orphaned foal that wasn't hers. Some animals are just wired differently, more empathetic somehow. When I heard about what happened with that little girl, I knew it had to be her. Claire's photos were shown to Emma, who immediately recognized her white guardian. The child's eyes filled with tears. "Can I see her again? Please." Patricia, Emma's foster carer, discussed it with the hospital staff and child protection. It was an unusual request, but Emma's recovery had stalled emotionally. She was physically healing but withdrawn, barely speaking, lost in trauma. Maybe seeing the horse would help. Claire arranged it. She knew where the white mare's territory was, knew her patterns. 2 weeks after Emma left the hospital, still weak but determined, Patricia drove her out to the forest with Claire as their guide. Jenny came too, wanting to see this through. They hiked carefully into the bush, Emma moving slowly, still recovering. Claire led them to a clearing near the creek, where she'd often spotted the mare. They waited quietly, and after about 20 minutes, the white Brumby appeared through the trees. Emma gasped. The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound, and she moved closer, cautiously at first, then with more confidence. She seemed to recognize the child, this small human she'd protected through that long, cold night. "Can I touch her?" Claire nodded, showing Emma how to approach slowly, hand outstretched. The mare sniffed Emma's palm, then gently nuzzled her face, just as she had in the forest. Emma wrapped her thin arms around the horse's neck and cried, really cried, for the first time since her rescue. "Thank you. Thank you for staying with me." The mare stood perfectly still, accepting the child's embrace with patience and gentleness that seemed almost human in its understanding. Patricia watched with tears in her eyes. Even Jenny, who prided herself on professional detachment, had to wipe her face. They stayed for an hour. Emma sat on a fallen log while the mare grazed nearby, never wandering far, occasionally coming back to check on the child. It was clear the bond formed that night in the forest hadn't been broken. Emma talked to the horse, told her about the hospital, about Patricia, about being scared and sad but also grateful. "My dad left me. But you didn't. You're braver than he was." The simple truth of it cut through everyone present. Emma understood what her father had done, understood it was wrong, but she also understood, in the way children sometimes do, that he'd been broken by grief and fear. She was angry and hurt, but there was something else there too, a resilience, a strength that surprised everyone. As they prepared to leave, Emma hugged the mare one more time. "Will I see you again?" Claire spoke up then, an idea forming. "I come out here to photograph the Brumbies every week. If Patricia agrees, maybe you could come with me sometimes. We can visit her together." Patricia looked at Emma's hopeful face and nodded. The visits became a regular thing. Every Saturday, weather permitting, Claire and Emma would hike into the bush to see the white mare. Emma named her Grace, the same name Michael would have given her if he'd known, though neither of them knew this. Through these visits, Emma began to heal. She talked to Grace about everything, her mother's death, her father's abandonment, her fears about the future. The mare would listen patiently, sometimes resting her head on Emma's shoulder, offering the uncomplicated comfort that only animals can provide. 3 months after the rescue, Michael's case went to court. His lawyer had built a defense around his mental state, the prolonged grief, the financial desperation, the fear of losing Emma to the system. The prosecution argued that none of this excused attempted murder. The judge listened to everything, including testimony from psychiatric experts who confirmed Michael had been suffering from severe depression and trauma-induced psychosis. Then she asked if Emma wanted to make a statement. Everyone expected the child to refuse, to want nothing to do with the father who'd left her to die. But Emma, stronger now, her lungs clear and her body healthy, asked to speak. She stood in the courtroom, small but steady, and looked at her father for the first time since that day in the forest. Michael couldn't meet her eyes, shame keeping his head bowed. "What my dad did was wrong, really wrong. I know that, but he wasn't always like this. Before Mum died, he was the best dad. He made me laugh. He taught me to ride my bike. He never missed a school concert. Then Mum got sick and everything changed. He tried so hard to keep us together, worked all the time, slept in his car so I could eat. He was so tired and sad and scared." Emma paused, gathering her courage. "I'm not saying what he did was okay, it wasn't, but I don't think he's a bad person. I think he was a good person who broke, and I think maybe, if he gets help, he could be good again." The courtroom was silent. Michael was openly sobbing, his shoulders shaking. The judge took a long moment before speaking. "Emma, you're a remarkable young lady. What your father did was unconscionable, and this court does not take that lightly. However, I also recognize that this was not a man with a history of violence or neglect, but rather someone who reached a breaking point and made a catastrophic decision." The judge sentenced Michael to 2 years in prison, suspended with 5 years of supervised probation. He would undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment, attend parenting classes, and would have no unsupervised contact with Emma until child protection deemed him fit. It was a controversial sentence. Some felt it was too lenient, others saw it as appropriately balanced between justice and mercy. Michael accepted it without complaint. He knew he'd been given a second chance he didn't deserve. The work of rebuilding his life began immediately. Therapy, medication for his depression, support groups for grieving parents. He got a job washing dishes at a pub, found a room in a boarding house, and slowly, painfully, began to piece himself back together. He wrote letters to Emma, not expecting responses, just needing her to know he was trying. Patricia would read them to Emma, who listened carefully but said little. She wasn't ready to forgive, might never be ready. But she didn't hate him. The white horse had taught her something about compassion, about how even broken creatures deserve a chance to heal. A year passed. Emma thrived in Patricia's care, started seeing a child psychologist who helped her process her trauma. She never missed a Saturday visit with Grace, and Claire began teaching her about wildlife photography. Emma had a gift for it, a patience and understanding that produced remarkable images. She photographed Grace extensively, captured the mare interacting with her mob, caring for this year's foals, grazing in the morning mist. One of Emma's photos, Grace standing in dappled sunlight, looking directly at the camera with those knowing eyes, won a youth photography competition. The prize money went into a trust for Emma's future. Michael heard about this through his supervised visits, which had finally been approved after months of therapy and assessment. They were brief, awkward meetings in a neutral location with a social worker present, but they were something. Emma would tell him about school, about Patricia, about Grace. Michael would listen, grateful for any scrap of connection, never pushing, never asking for more than Emma was willing to give. One Saturday, Emma asked if her father could come to see Grace. It was a huge step, one Patricia and the social worker carefully considered. Finally, they agreed. Michael met them at the trailhead. Nervous and uncertain, Emma was polite but distant, not ready for hugs or easy affection. They hiked into the bush together, a strange little procession. When they reached the clearing and Grace appeared, something shifted. Emma's face lit up the way it used to when Michael would come home from work. She ran to the mare, and Grace greeted her with obvious affection. Michael watched his daughter with the horse and understood, finally, what Grace really meant. This wild creature had done what he couldn't, stayed when things got hard, protected the vulnerable, acted selflessly without thought of reward. The horse had been braver, stronger, better than he had been. "She's beautiful, Em." Emma turned to look at her father, really look at him. He was thinner, older looking, but his eyes were clearer than she remembered. There was something different about him, something that reminded her of who he used to be. "She saved my life, Dad, when you couldn't." The words were honest, not meant to wound, but not softened either. Michael nodded, accepting the truth of them.